The morning light in Boulder, Colorado was crisp and deceptively peaceful on December 26, 1996. Snow blanketed the quiet streets, muffling the sounds of a city recovering from the exuberance of Christmas Day. For most, it was a time of lingering warmth, but for the residents of 755 15th Street, the tranquility was about to be shattered forever. This was the home of the Ramsey family, a household that epitomized the American dream. John Ramsey, a successful businessman, and his wife Patsy, a former pageant queen, lived in a sprawling mansion that felt more like an opulent sanctuary than a potential crime scene. With their two children, Burke and the vibrant 6-year-old John Bonet, they were the picture of prosperity, frequently appearing in local social circles as a family that had it all. Their lives were a tapestry of achievement, woven together in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in the country. The nightmare began not with a bang, but with the rustle of paper. Early that morning, while the house was still dim and the air held the chill of the Colorado winter, Patsy Ramsey made her way down the back staircase. There, sprawled across the wooden steps, she discovered 3 pages of handwritten text. It wasn't a holiday card, it was a disturbing ransom note. The words were chillingly precise, claiming that their daughter, JonBenet, had been taken by a small foreign faction. The demand was for a specific sum, $118,000. The terror that gripped Patsy in that moment was primal and immediate. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Her scream pierced the silence of the house, a sound that would haunt those who heard it for the rest of their lives. John rushed to her side, and the reality of the situation crashed down upon them like a freezing wave. The note warned of dire consequences if the police were contacted or if the money was not delivered exactly as instructed. At 5:52 a.m., the local emergency dispatcher received a call that would become one of the most scrutinized pieces of audio in history. Patsy's voice was a frantic blur of desperation. "We have a kidnapping!" she sobbed, her words tumbling out in a breathless, jagged rush. The dispatcher struggled to keep her calm, but the panic in the Ramsey household was already spiraling out of control. In those initial moments, the house became a hive of chaotic energy. John began pacing, his mind racing through the logistics of the ransom, while Patsy's cries echoed through the high-ceilinged hallways. The sheer impossibility of the situation felt like a fever dream. Their young daughter, the girl who had captured hearts in child beauty pageants with her radiant smile and stage presence, was gone from her bed. She had left behind nothing but a threatening letter and a void of terrifying uncertainty that no amount of wealth could ever fill. What struck investigators later as particularly bizarre was the ransom amount. $118,000 was a remarkably specific figure, especially for a group claiming to be a foreign faction. It was even more jarring when it was discovered that this amount almost exactly matched the annual bonus John Ramsey had received earlier that year. This detail added a layer of chilling intimacy to the crime, suggesting that whoever wrote the note had deep knowledge of the family's personal finances. As the sun began to rise over the Rockies, the Ramsey home was no longer a private residence. It was a theater of confusion. Family friends arrived shortly after the call, wanting to offer support in their friend's darkest hour. However, in the frantic scramble to help, the boundaries of a crime scene were ignored. People moved through the kitchen, touched various surfaces, and unknowingly disturbed the environment that detectives would later need to reconstruct with precision. The Boulder Police Department arrived on the scene, but the atmosphere remained one of informal urgency rather than a clinical investigation. Officers were present, but the house wasn't immediately sealed off. The kitchen became a staging area for grief and coffee, while the search for the missing girl was conducted with a sense of desperate, frantic hope. Everyone was looking outward, scanning the snowy horizon for a kidnapper's vehicle, never suspecting that the true horror might be much closer than they could ever imagine. The police searched the upper floors, checking every closet, but the house was vast and filled with festive shadows. As the clock ticked away the morning and the deadline mentioned in the note loomed, the tension reached a breaking point. A more thorough search of the house was finally ordered, a room-by-room sweep to find any clue. This search was about to reveal a secret in the dark corners of the basement that would change the nation forever. It was shortly after 1 o'clock in the afternoon when Detective Linda Arndt, struggling to manage a household overflowing with tension and unhelpful observers, suggested that John Ramsey and his close friend Fleet White conduct a search of the premises to see if anything seemed out of place. This request, intended to keep a frantic father occupied during a stagnant investigation, would lead directly to the most devastating moment of the entire ordeal. John led the way way to the basement, a labyrinthine area of the mansion filled with seasonal storage, hobby rooms, and deep shadows. They moved through the playrooms until they reached a small, windowless room often referred to as the wine cellar. When John opened that door, the world as the Ramseys knew it disintegrated into a nightmare of absolute finality. There, lying on the cold floor, was the body of 6-year-old JonBenét. She was wrapped in a white fringed thermal blanket, her small frame looking impossibly fragile against the concrete. The scene was a jarring, horrific contrast to the festive holiday decorations that still adorned the upper floors of the house. Her wrists were tied above her head with a white nylon cord, and a piece of black duct tape was pressed firmly over her mouth. A makeshift garrote, fashioned from a wooden handle and more of the nylon cord, was tightened around her neck. It was a sight of calculated cruelty that defied the quiet domestic setting. The wooden handle, later identified as part of a paintbrush belonging to Patsy Ramsey, indicated a terrifying level of premeditation and proximity to the family's own belongings. In an explosion of grief and paternal instinct, John Ramsey did exactly what any parent would do, but what every investigator feared. He reached down, tore the tape from her mouth, and scooped his daughter's body into his arms. He carried her upstairs, his cries echoing through the high-ceilinged hallways, and laid her down on the floor in the living room near the Christmas tree. In those frantic seconds, the integrity of the crime scene was shattered. By moving her, John had unintentionally disturbed vital forensic evidence, potentially transferring his own DNA or fibers and obscuring the original position of the body. The police, already criticized for their loose control over the household earlier that morning, watched in stunned silence as the most vital evidence in a murder investigation was handled and moved before it could be properly documented. As the initial shock began to settle into a cold reality, the investigation pivoted sharply. What began as a kidnapping case was now a brutal homicide. The preliminary autopsy results only added to the complexity and horror of the crime. JonBenét had not simply been strangled, she had suffered a massive skull fracture, likely caused by a heavy, blunt object, though there was no outward bleeding from the head wound. The strangulation had been slow and methodical, utilizing the garrote to exert immense pressure. There were also signs of prior injury and potential assault that suggested a level of violence that was difficult to reconcile with the image of a small foreign faction simply looking for a payout. This was personal and extraordinarily violent, suggesting a struggle that took place within the very walls that were supposed to keep her safe. The atmosphere within the Boulder Police Department shifted from one of urgent rescue to one of deep suspicion. Within hours, the investigators began to look at the family through a different lens. The ransom note now seemed like a bizarre distraction, a lengthy, theatrical prop that didn't align with the discovery of the body inside the house. If the goal was money, why was the victim still on the premises? If the goal was murder, why leave a 3-page ransom note? The inconsistencies began to pile up, creating a rift between the grieving parents and the law enforcement officers who were supposed to find their daughter's killer. The case was no longer about a missing girl, it was about uncovering the truth hidden within a house of secrets. This tension between the Ramseys and the Boulder Police Department sparked almost immediately. The family felt they were being treated as suspects rather than victims, while the police felt the Ramseys were being evasive and overly protective. The presence of high-powered attorneys and public relations consultants very early in the process only deepened the department's distrust. To the detectives on the ground, the family's behavior didn't fit the expected mold of parental grief. To the Ramseys, the police appeared incompetent and tunnel-visioned, more interested in pinning the crime on the parents than in searching for an outside intruder who might still be at large. This professional conflict would haunt the case for decades, stalling progress and clouding the search for justice. As evening fell over Boulder and the forensic teams finally began to process the house with more rigor, a glaring detail emerged that would become the cornerstone of the prosecution's unofficial case. The house had been surrounded by a fresh, undisturbed layer of snow. There were no footprints leading to or from the house that couldn't be accounted for by the police or the family. Every door was locked, and while a basement window was found broken, it was covered in old cobwebs and debris that appeared undisturbed. The lack of forced entry in a house filled with sleeping family members created a chilling paradox. How could an intruder enter, spend enough time to write a long ransom note, commit a violent murder, and exit without leaving a single mark in the white Colorado snow. The suspicion turned inward, focusing on the people inside. The media frenzy began almost before the yellow crime scene tape was fully secured around the grand Tudor-style home. Within days, the world was introduced to JonBenét Ramsey not through the lens of a grieving family's home movies, but through the high-glitz, heavily choreographed footage of child beauty pageants. These images showing a 6-year-old in heavy makeup and elaborate costumes created an immediate and polarized public image. To some, she was a symbol of lost innocence. To others, the pageantry itself felt like a bizarre precursor to tragedy, casting a shadow over the investigation. This media explosion transformed a local murder into a national obsession, capturing the attention of millions across the globe, and the perfect family facade began to crack under the weight of relentless tabloid speculation regarding the glitzy and controversial pageant world. Public scrutiny turned toward the Ramseys' lifestyle, dissecting their wealth and social standing in Boulder's elite circles. As investigators dug deeper, the behavior of John and Patsy Ramsey became a focal point of intense behavioral analysis. In the critical first few days, the couple did not sit for formal, separate interviews with the police. Instead, they surrounded themselves with high-powered defense attorneys and public relations experts. While their legal team argued this was a necessary protection against a biased police department, to the American public and the investigators who were mourning along with the family, it looked like a calculated move to avoid scrutiny. This perceived lack of cooperation fueled a growing narrative of suspicion. Why would innocent parents refuse to speak freely with the very people tasked with solving the crime? This question became the heartbeat of the case's early months. Central to the police's suspicion was the ransom note. At nearly 3 pages long, it was an anomaly in the history of kidnapping cases. Experts noted its dramatic tone, filled with phrases that seemed lifted from Hollywood thrillers. Most damningly, forensic analysis confirmed the note had been written on a pad of paper found inside the house, using a pen that also belonged to the Ramseys. A practice note was even discovered, suggesting the author had taken their time to draft the message. The idea that an intruder would break into a home, find stationery, and spend 20 minutes writing a long-winded demand seems statistically improbable to many investigators. The note's demand for exactly $118,000, the precise amount of John's annual bonus, suggested an intimate knowledge of the family's finances. 2 distinct camps emerged. The family involvement theory suggested a tragic accident or a fit of rage followed by an elaborate, panicked cover-up. Proponents pointed to the staged nature of the crime scene and the inconsistencies in the ransom note. Conversely, the intruder theory, championed by veteran investigator Lou Smit, argued that a sophisticated predator had stalked the family, entered through a basement window, and committed the crime while the family slept. Smit pointed to unidentified boot prints and a mysterious DNA profile found on JonBenét's clothing as proof of an outside presence. This ideological war divided the Boulder community and the authorities, creating a stalemate where evidence was interpreted through the lens of whichever theory a person chose to believe. Amidst this chaos, the psychological toll on John and Patsy was visible. On New Year's Day, just 1 week after the murder, the couple appeared on CNN in a televised interview that many viewed as a calculated attempt to reclaim the narrative. Patsy, appearing fragile, made a desperate plea for the real killer to come forward, while John maintained a stoic composure. Their public appearances did little to quell the rumors. Every sigh and every word was parsed for signs of deception. As 1997 progressed, the pressure and legal ambiguity on the district attorney's office reached a boiling point. The police were convinced they had their suspects, but the evidence was circumstantial. In a move to bypass the investigative deadlock, a secret and shocking grand jury was finally convened to review the evidence behind closed doors. They would spend over a year listening to testimony, yet the results of their deliberations would remain a closely guarded secret, hidden from the public for decades, leaving the nation to wonder what the jurors had truly discovered in the end. While the grand jury's proceedings remained shrouded in legal secrecy, investigators focused their attention on the technological remnants of the crime's first moments. The 911 call, placed by a frantic Patsy Ramsey at 5:52 a.m., was subjected to intense digital enhancement. Technicians at the laboratory worked to isolate background noises after Patsy appeared to hang up the receiver, believing the line was dead. What they allegedly discovered sent shockwaves through the Boulder Police Department. In the 6 seconds of audio before the call truly ended, investigators claimed to hear 3 distinct voices. A male voice asked, "We're not speaking to you." followed by a female voice whispering, "What did you do?" And finally, a smaller, high-pitched voice asking, "What did you find?" To the police, this was the smoking gun, suggesting that young Burke Ramsey was not only awake, but present in the room, contradicting the parents' claims that he had slept through the entire ordeal. The focus on 9-year-old Burke opened a dark new chapter in the public's fascination. A theory took root that the tragedy was a sibling accident gone wrong. Perhaps a dispute over a snack escalated to a fatal blow, followed by a desperate parental cover-up to protect their only remaining child. This theory gained weight with the discovery of a bowl of pineapple on the kitchen table. Analysis of the bowl revealed the fingerprints of both Patsy and Burke. More importantly, the autopsy revealed undigested pineapple in JonBenét's stomach, which medical examiners estimated had been consumed shortly before her death. This physical evidence directly challenged the Ramseys' assertion that JonBenét had been asleep in her bed since arriving home. If she was in the kitchen eating pineapple with her brother, the timeline of the intruder abduction was fundamentally broken. However, the intruder theory was far from dead, thanks largely to the work of Lou Smit. Brought in to assist the prosecution, veteran investigator Lou Smit became convinced of the family's innocence. He spent hours crawling through the Ramsey basement, eventually focusing on a broken window and a suitcase positioned beneath it. Smit argued that the small, circular marks found on JonBenét's body were not from a struggle, but from a stun gun used by a predator to incapacitate the child. He believed a killer entered the home, waited in the shadows, and committed the crime undetected. Smit's dedication to this theory created a profound rift within the investigation. The Boulder Police Department remained steadfast in their suspicion of the parents, while the district attorney's office, influenced by Smit's findings, grew increasingly hesitant to bring charges without concrete physical evidence. The civil war between the police and the district attorney stalled the case for years. Every piece of physical evidence was filtered through two different competing lenses. Where the police saw a staged crime scene, the DA saw a lack of forced entry that wasn't definitive. Where the police saw a suspicious ransom note, the DA saw a lack of handwriting certainty. The tension reached a boiling point when the DNA evidence emerged. Technicians discovered a small trace of unidentified male DNA on the waistband and leg of JonBenét's leggings, as well as beneath her fingernails. This profile, dubbed Unknown Male 1, did not match John Ramsey, Burke Ramsey, or any of the family's close friends. For intruder theory proponents, this was the ultimate vindication. It suggested that a third party, someone completely outside the Ramsey circle, had been in direct contact with the child. The DNA evidence shifted the momentum, forcing authorities to look beyond the mansion. If the killer was a stranger, the search would have to go global. Years of stagnant leads left the public weary, but the mystery was about to take its most bizarre turn. In 2006, as the world looked elsewhere, a stunning development arrived from Thailand. A former teacher named John Mark Carr issued a detailed and haunting confession that seemed to answer the questions that had haunted Boulder for a decade. The clock was reset, and a new international media circus was about to begin. The news from Bangkok hit like a thunderclap in August 2006, jolting a public that had largely consigned the JonBenét Ramsey case to the archives of unsolved mysteries. For 10 years, the investigation had remained a stagnant pool of suspicion, but suddenly, the world was staring at the face of John Mark Carr. This former schoolteacher, apprehended by Thai authorities in a high-rise apartment, did not merely offer information, he offered a confession. In front of a sea of flashing cameras, he spoke in a soft, chillingly calm voice, telling reporters that he had been with JonBenét when she died. He claimed he loved her, and described her death as an accident during a botched kidnapping. It was the sensational breakthrough that the public had craved, a moment that seemed to validate years of obsession. The media frenzy was instantaneous, as news vans once again swarmed the streets of Boulder, broadcasting Carr's every word as if the mystery had finally reached its conclusion. This development was a global phenomenon. The climax of this surreal episode played out like a high-stakes thriller. Carr was extradited back to the United States amidst a whirlwind of international headlines. He was famously photographed sipping champagne on his first-class flight, a detail that repulsed the public and added to the grotesque nature of the spectacle. However, as the legal machinery began to grind, the narrative rapidly dissolved. Forensic experts realized that Carr's confession was a tapestry of details likely gleaned from years of consuming public reports rather than first-hand knowledge of the crime scene. The definitive blow came from the laboratory. The DNA profile extracted from JonBenét's clothing did not match Carr's genetic markers. He was not the elusive Unknown Male 1. Instead, he was a man consumed by a dark, pathological fixation, a false confessor who had successfully manipulated the world's desire for closure. When the charges were eventually dropped, the investigation plummeted back to square one, leaving behind a profound sense of emotional exhaustion and a deeper distrust of the process. This exhaustion was felt most acutely by the Ramsey family, who continued to live under a suffocating cloud of suspicion despite the lack of formal charges. The car episode had been a cruel distraction from the personal tragedy hollowing out their lives. Patsy Ramsey, who had spent years fighting both the legal system and the court of public opinion, was also fighting a recurring battle with stage 4 ovarian cancer. The stress of the investigation and the grief of losing her daughter had taken a visible toll on her health. In June 2006, just months before the car confession would dominate the headlines, Patsy passed away at the age of 49. She died without ever seeing an arrest made in her daughter's murder, and without the formal exoneration she had so desperately sought. Her death marked a somber turning point. The perfect family unit was now permanently fractured. One of the central figures in the mystery had gone to her grave, taking her own perspectives and secrets with her. This was a tragic conclusion. The tragedy of justice delayed became the defining legacy of this era. Critics argued that the intense and often narrow focus on the Ramsey family during the critical first hours had created a damaging tunnel vision. This focus may have allowed the real killer to walk away into the snowy night. While police were busy analyzing the parents' behavior, evidence had been contaminated and the trail had grown cold while authorities fought internal wars over theories. The power of public opinion had effectively replaced the legal process, creating a trial by media where headlines carried more weight than forensic reports. The image of the blonde girl in her pageant finery had become a permanent fixture of American culture, but she had become a symbol rather than a victim. Even as the years turned into decades, the case refused to die. The Boulder Police Department remained the custodians of the evidence, waiting for a breakthrough. Just as the world began to believe that the truth might stay buried forever, a revolution in forensic science was beginning to take shape. New technology, far more sensitive than anything available in 1996, was emerging, promising to look at the old, weathered evidence through a crystalline, modern lens. The impact of the JonBenét Ramsey case extends far beyond the borders of Colorado, serving as a watershed moment for American society. Before that fateful Christmas morning, true crime was a niche interest, confined to pulp magazines or local news. However, the tragedy in Boulder transformed the genre into a national obsession, setting the stage for the 24-hour news cycle that would define the modern media landscape. The world didn't just watch, they consumed every frame of the pageant videos and every word of the 911 call. This case rewrote the rules of public interest, blending the reality of homicide with the polished, eerie aesthetics of child beauty pageants. It created a profound and permanent shift in how parents perceived safety, moving the fear from the dark alleyways of the city into the secure, white picket fence neighborhoods of suburbia. Today, the investigation remains in a state of suspension, officially classified as a cold case but never abandoned. The Boulder Police Department continues to maintain a meticulous archive of evidence, yet the primary focus has narrowed down to a single DNA profile of unknown male 1. This genetic ghost, found on JonBenét's clothing, represents the ultimate bridge between the crime and the identity of the person who committed it. As the years have marched on, forensic science has evolved into a surgical instrument. The emergence of investigative genetic genealogy, the method that unmasked the Golden State Killer after decades of silence, has become the focal point of hope. By uploading the unknown profile to public DNA databases, investigators can now trace the family trees of distant relatives, narrowing down the hunt to specific lineages that were previously invisible. For John Ramsey, the quest for truth has become a lifelong mission that transcends the clearing of his name. As the sole surviving parent, he carries the burden of his family's fractured legacy, often appearing at crime conventions to lobby for aggressive, independent testing of the evidence. His relationship with the Boulder police remains tense and complex, as he pushes for the case to be handed over to outside agencies with advanced technological resources. John's public life is a testament to the enduring trauma. He is a man who lived the American dream only to see it incinerated by a single night of horror and years of suspicion. His fight is not just for his daughter, but for the memory of Patsy and the reputation of his son Burke, as he seeks to replace the theories of the past with hard, undeniable facts. The JonBenét case established a grim precedent for American tragedies, creating a blueprint for the media-saturated investigations of cases like Madeleine McCann. It taught the public to be investigators and the media to be judges. Yet, despite the words written, the psychological profile of the killer remains an enigma. Profilers are still divided over the contradictory nature of the evidence. On one hand, the brutal violence was personal, a skull fracture and a garrote. On the other hand, the 3-page ransom note suggested a perpetrator who was desperate for control, perhaps even someone who knew the family's financial details. This haunting mystery is what keeps the story alive, as the crime fits no standard mold, defying easy categorization and leaving behavioral experts in a perpetual state of debate. As technology continues to bridge the gap between 1996 and the present day, there is a chilling realization that the person might be terrifyingly alive, somewhere, perhaps in a quiet suburb. An aging individual may be watching the television specials that air every December. The elusive perpetrator has watched as the Ramsey family was torn apart by the public, and as false confessors stole the global spotlight. The killer has seen the world remain obsessed with their work for over a quarter of a century, living a life of anonymity while the innocent face of their victim remains frozen in time. The silence of the enigmatic unknown male is the most haunting aspect of the legacy, a stark reminder that the truth is often much closer than we think, yet just out of reach, waiting for the final piece of the genetic puzzle to fall into place. Beyond the sequins, the heavy stage makeup, and the practiced smiles, there was a little girl named JonBenét who was far more than a media icon. To the world, she became a symbol of a lost era and a catalyst for a national obsession. But to those who truly knew her, she was a child of 6, vibrating with the innocent energy of a life just beginning. We often lose sight of the person behind the mystery, the girl who played in the crisp Colorado snow and looked forward to the magic of Christmas morning with unshielded joy. The pageant videos offer only a curated glimpse into a life stolen before it could find its own direction. To remember her only through the lens of a crime scene or a stage performance is to do a disservice to her humanity. Her laughter and the small, everyday moments of her short years have been tragically eclipsed by the suffocating darkness of her final hours, leaving us to mourn a person we only think we know. The search for redemption in a case this old and deeply scarred is fraught with obstacles that often feel insurmountable. Can a case fundamentally contaminated in its first few hours ever truly be resolved in a court of law? The forensic landscape of the Ramsey home was compromised long before the sun set on that first day. Friends walked through the house, while the discovery of the body itself led to a further breakdown of protocol. This initial chaos created a permanent shadow of doubt that looms over every piece of physical evidence gathered. The ransom note remains one of the most polarizing artifacts in history, a 3-page document of strange demands written on the family's stationery, a piece of evidence that seems to point inward. Yet, in direct opposition stands the DNA of unknown male 1, a genetic ghost found on her clothing that suggests an outsider. These two pillars of the case stand at odds, preventing the definitive resolution the world so desperately craves. Justice for JonBenét may never take the form of a traditional courtroom verdict. Instead, the persistent, tireless search for the truth has become a form of justice in its own right. Every time the evidence is re-examined through a modern lens, it serves as a refusal to let her memory be consigned to the archives of forgotten cold cases. While legal closure remains an elusive dream, the dedication of those who still seek the facts honors her life by ensuring her story remains a living pursuit. This tragedy did not just end one life. It effectively dismantled the Ramsey family and cast a long spell of suspicion over Boulder. John Ramsey's continued fight to clear the family name is a testament to the enduring nature of grief and the desperate need for an answer that can finally quiet the whispers. As we reflect on that cold December night in 1996, we are confronted with the terrifying fragility of the American dream. The Ramseys lived a life of success, yet the unthinkable found a way through their doors. It remains a haunting reminder that darkness can reside in the most unexpected places, hiding behind a facade of holiday decorations. The resolution of this case is not found in the strike of a gavel, but in the collective acknowledgement of the human lives that were irrevocably altered. It is a story of a family fractured, a mother who died without peace, and Burke, whose childhood was redefined by speculation. We are left with the lingering silence of that basement and the unanswered questions that continue to drift through the Colorado air. The evidence remains a complex labyrinth, leading us down competing paths of suspicion and empathy. Was it the work of a calculated intruder or a domestic tragedy hidden beneath a middle-of-the-night cover-up? As the decades march on, the face of the little girl remains frozen in time, an eternal witness to a mystery that refuses to sleep. What do you believe truly happened on that night when the lights went out? The truth may still be out there, buried in a DNA strand, or locked within the conscience of someone who has remained silent for too long, waiting for the day when the shadows finally retreat.